Here we go. And Martin's going to talk about dealing with dissonance, digital education in crisis and beyond as a challenge to mindset. So over to you.
Cheers. Thanks, Phil. You can hear me okay? Yeah.
Yes, we can. Yeah.
Good. And thanks to Andy. I love a good analogy. I've been thinking about where steamrollers will go, where buses packed with people will go, and all sorts of stuff like that. So, yeah, I can extend that ad infinitum, I think. I've been fascinated to hear what everybody's been saying this morning. I think there's a slight confusion over my title. What I intended was the one you can see on the screen there, which is in times of crisis rather than digital education in crisis. But actually, perhaps it is worth thinking about, you know, looking back to what Chris was saying about how people want to react and respond does tie in with some of the things that I've been concerned with. And maybe it is a crisis point. It's been so many successes this year, but also are we hitting something that may be perceived as crisis? So I'm going to whiz through some slides here, and I hope that you will forgive me for going really, really fast. But essentially what you can see on this slide are the two institutions that I've worked at this year with their big pillars and their stonework and whatever. But actually, it's largely irrelevant because although I've changed jobs, I'm still at the same desk. What you can see in that bottom picture is what I can see now. I'm in the same place that I was in my previous job, that I am in my current job. And it's a really weird and disconcerting phenomenon. What I do know is that for 5 years prior to the COVID pandemic, I was teaching online. I was working in academic development. I had a program leader of a PG Cert online. And in my new job, I'm all about connecting pedagogic practice with digital education, and I'm involved in academic development work there. And in that context, I'm very interested in thinking about what's worked, what hasn't, and how we can promote dialogue about effecting positive transition to whatever is that new normal. A quick caveat before I go on any further, and that is to say that what I'm talking about here is much more about institutional cultures and leadership rather than about individual lecturers. You know, I think Andy was very careful in his presentation to identify people who might be in the slower lanes, not in terms of a critique of their practice, but this is where people end up for all sorts of reasons. And one of the things that I want to emphasize is that institutional or even departmental cultures can really frame and shape the way that you operate. So the lecturers who might be dreaming of what we can see on the screen there, of going back to that, walking up and down in front of the students, saying your thing and all of that, have shifted from that to, this is the sort of most apocalyptic vision of what we've been doing I could find, to something like this. And for many, it's been a horror show. While for others, as others have mentioned today, it's been a real delight and an opportunity and a transition. Right from the very start of this, I've been, along with lots and lots of colleagues across the sector, and we've heard about it today as well, championing the ideas of compassion as a key driver and putting that at the forefront of our pedagogy, centering care in terms of our expectations, not only with students though, but also in the way that we work with colleagues and what we expect from colleagues. And I have felt that those that have really missed the lecturing experience the most of some of those that have suffered the most, and this isn't to do with their bandwidth, connectivity, digital skills or what have you. It's because their identity is so wrapped up in their teaching persona and that teacher as performance aspect that so many love. Many don't, but many do as well. So whilst many are imagining a return to the big lecture halls like this, I think there are plenty of others who are not only imagining this. I'm a little bit nervous about the optimism that I expressed earlier in a question to Chris, but also some are actually hoping for this. There have been challenges to the big pedagogic approaches that define higher education during COVID. The lecture is one of them, examinations are another one. And that tension between what we will return to and what we want to return to is going to be, as Chris said, the big thing that I think we're talking about next year. So whilst we might be skeptical about what's changed and what we can change, I think inevitably we're all going to be doing a lot more of what we can see here. Looking at computers and perhaps feeling anxious. Why anxious? Well, I think it's because that there is this dissonance, this cognitive dissonance in a lot of the things that we've been doing. Whether we want to look at it from an individual level or from an institutional or departmental level is kind of up to us. So without, wanting to go into theory and dwell on all that kind of stuff, I have lent on terminology and phrasing from famously from Leon Festinger, but also from Carol Dweck, who talks about fixed and growth mindsets. What's really key here is the framing idea of cognitive dissonance. So that, just to clarify, is a sort of anxiety that you experience in your own behaviors when you are doing something that doesn't sit right with your core values and beliefs. So it might be having to act in ways that run contrary to what you love and like. So the people who are really resistant to doing what we're doing at the moment, but also those that are feeling as though the pressure, the force is more than COVID. It's more than a consequence of circumstance. It's about, people are suspicious of whether we're being driven down certain paths. And a really core part of these sort of theoretical ideas is how people might be subject to confirmation bias. So we look for evidence to support the views that we perhaps carry into a situation like this. So I will share the link to this one video that's got 4 arguments in it. It's generating quite a bit of debate at the moment. There's a Mentimeter that goes with it. I'll share that link at the end if it's not too horrific to see 5, 6 versions of me on a screen at once. But these are kind of illustrations of what I'm talking about. Just to take one example, our intuitions about video length are often wrong. So we know from a lot of evidence that shorter videos are more effective in terms of engagement time and so on and so forth. However, a lot of people will do anything that they can to justify actually recording a longer video, 1 hour, sometimes 2 hours. And there is that dissonance between what we know and what people do and the reasons and excuses they make, sometimes with some strong cases made and a strong validity, but otherwise sometimes actually perhaps tapping into their fears and concerns about their identity. So, how do we challenge some of these issues here? I think there is a tendency at an individual level for people to have that cognitive dissonance exacerbated by institutional fixed mindsets. So a belief within a department or an institution that actually we shouldn't be changing. We're incapable of changing. We've adapted. I heard a lot last year. Look, we're not the OU. We're not going to do this because we're not the OU. We'll do what we can. We'll make the best fist of it. Let's do this. It'll be okay. And it will all be back to normal soon. And that narrative, I think, is actually quite dangerous and damaging. So what do we do when we want to challenge this? What I don't want to do as an academic developer, as someone who's keen on digital education, is to blunder my way into conversations and say, oh yeah, you should be doing this, you should be thinking about that. And I'm trying with those videos that I'll share to provoke some debate. And I want to position this as a discussion, because the last thing I want to do is for people to put their arms across their chests and put the barriers up to stifle that discussion and stifle that debate. What I don't want colleagues to do is to double down on their pre-existing concepts and ideas and close themselves off to that.
2 minutes left, Martin.
Got it. So how are we going to do that? Well, if we look at what Festinger says, it's about promoting opportunities to resolve the anxiety that exists, I think, not only within individuals, but within teams, departments, institutions. And how do we do that? Well, we need to identify what can change. And the 2 key things that can change, that need to go together somehow, are our beliefs and our actions. What do we believe? How do we behave? How do we act? The pandemic, of course, forced us to change our actions. But if it's reluctantly and with a sense of, let me just get through this, then we're not opening ourselves to the potential for proper reflection and dialogue. If we want to utilize the technologies that are available to us and maximize the affordances that are available to us, then how can we start some kind of debate rather than doing what a lot of people have been doing and trying to replicate the face-to-face experience? How can we embrace the years of scholarship and experience and research that some of the colleagues here in this space now have conducted and optimize that and start to really process some of the reflections? So what I would encourage everybody to do is to think about how we can mediate reflection with colleagues. We're at a time now where reflection can be promoted. How can we look back to look forward? How can we pull apart some of the things that have worked and say, yes, this has worked in this context at least. Why? But also, why didn't it work? How much of that is to do with mindset? How much of it is to do with our dependence on our intuitions and our existing values rather than the scholarship and all the other things that go with it? It's really interesting when you're confronted with academics who work in these seats of learning, in these temples to criticality, who are actually still prepared to close their minds off. And it's because it's been so anxiety ridden, so stressful. I totally understand that. But all I want now is to have some proper discussion and proper debate and proper argument, because I could be wrong about a lot of things I believe. I know I'm really opinionated, and I really want people to pull me up on that and call me out and start those debates. So whatever happens, I want me and all of you and everyone, all my colleagues, to be in this or some kind of equivalent luxuriant position. I want us to think about these things. I want us to talk about them. And I think that cognitive dissonance actually, and the idea of opening ourselves up towards a more growth mindset, are ways that we can frame our thinking on these things. I'm going to stop there.
Well, I don't know about anyone else, but I'm certainly loving these talks. That was really good. Thank you, Martin. From a personal point, I really loved the videos and the way that you talked through that presentation. That was first class. So thank you for that. That was really good. I have one question, and then I'm going to. There's a couple in the chat as well. So when you say people might be hesitant to head down certain paths, I think you're absolutely right, and there are a number of reasons for that. But how would you deal with this?
Well, I think there is this hard to reach notion. How do we get to the people who are hard to reach? But I think one of the things that's missing from our experiences now are those in the corridor conversations, the overheard snippets, the things you do in the when you bump into someone in the lift. And we need to find vehicles to stimulate that. And I mean, I don't know about colleagues here, but it's going to be really difficult for us. Our offices are being used as classrooms at the moment. There's going to be all sorts of reasons why some people will be on campus and some won't. But it is, despite all of those difficulties, finding an opportunity and a time to have conversations. I'm not a fan of sharing what's labelled as best practice, but I am quite keen to share more case studies of what has worked for me in my circumstance as a kind of reframing of that.
I think that's a really important point to make there, the term best practice. I completely agree with you there, because it kind of signifies that practice or that approach applies for everyone, and we all know that that's not the case. So I do think that's an important point to make. I'm just looking at the time. We do have other questions, but in the interest of keeping to time, I think we might have to stop there. It's such a shame, because I think we could again go on for forever. So thank you so much, Martin. If you could answer some of the questions in the Q&A, I know everyone would appreciate that. So thank you.